Hey people, it's Stokie. So welcome to part 3 of Black History Steve Biko. Steve's medical studies suffered as a result of his political activism, and he was excluded from the medical school during the course of 1972. Having given up the idea of becoming a doctor, Steve enrolled for various courses at the distance learning university, UNISA. In 1973, he began studying law and political science, subjects more relevant to his political involvement. Throughout this early period, Steve had been based in Natal, and the BCM had offices in Beatrice Street in the town centre. By 1971, Ramphele's marriage had broken down and she resumed her romantic relationship with Biko, who by now had a son with his wife, Nansiki Mashalaba. The situation proved to be too stressful for all concerned and added to the pressures of their political activities. The state banned Steve in March 1973 and confined him to the magisterial district of King Williamstown. He returned to Ginsburg and moved for a while into his mother's house in Laytonville, the address to which he was restricted by his banning order. With Steve working for the black community programs earning a stipend, the family relied on the income of Natsiki, who had been the main breadwinner for some time. But with the move to Ginsburg, the apartheid authorities ensured that Natsiki would not easily find a job, and the family struggled to make ends meet. Steve asked Malusi Mapumlawana, who had been his constant companion in Durban, to join him in King Williamstown to help set up an office for the BCM. Mapumlawana went, according to Lindy Wilson, thinking he could spare a couple of weeks. The weeks turned into months and years. In fact, he never left. Steve met up with an old friend, Fikil Melinda, and asked him to help in the establishment of a BBC branch in Ginsburg. They held their first meeting in St. Andrew's Church, where Anglican priest David Russell was based. A core of strong comrades from all over the country attended the meeting, including Malusi Mapumlawana, Mapetla Mohapi, Peter Jones, and Tom Manafata. Melinda was soon arrested, evidence that the security agencies were keeping a close eye on Steve's activities. But members of the local community were encouraged by the strong turnout, including the comrades from far-off regions. The venue, the Anglican St. Andrew's Church, was provided by David Russell. Steve was drawn to Russell, who became his confidant. Russell had for some time been involved with people forcibly removed from Middleburg and burghers dropped to Dimbaza, which was part of his parish. Russell had engaged in protests against the forced removals, in one instance going on a fast to draw attention to the hunger of the people, moved to a barren area with no infrastructure. But Russell moved from the area in December 1973, depriving Steve of a close and trusted friend. Steve was also in frequent contact with Father Alred Stubbs, but moved to Alice when he began serving at the Federal Seminary. Stubbs, an Anglican priest, came to South Africa to teach at St. Peter's in Rosettenville, Johannesburg. He also became a confidant, and Steve frequently wrote to him when Stubbs was moved back to Rosettenville in 1972. Besides his BC comrades, Steve was lucky to have his family around him to provide a strong support system. His mother, Mamsete, and sisters, Nobandila and Bokelwa, all played a part, keeping him not just Biko, but his comrades in good health and spirits. The Biko family house was a gathering place for the movement, but also a place where they had meals, drank, and enjoyed socializing. Steve engaged in several projects in the area. BCP ran projects that created home industries. Nadwaksa Home Industries began being one of these. These were attempts, often successful, to create business and employment. Nadwaksa manufactured leather goods and clothes, employing about 50 people in 1974. A further 70 were employed by the Border Council of Churches in collaboration with BCP. Steve set up the Ginsburg Educational Fund, which provided bursaries for students, many of them going to Fort Hare University. The fund, run by Malusi and Foko Mapumlawana, Nole Mohapi, and Charles Nakakula, grew to include recipients in other Eastern Cape areas. Steve also helped revive the Ginsburg creche to look after toddlers whose mothers needed to leave their homes to go out to work. The Zanampilo Health Clinic in Zinyoka village, 10 kilometers outside King Williamstown, was established with the help of a donation from a South African citizen of German origin. Steve approached Baka Tayamzashe, who asked Reverend James Go to help. Steve and BCP were given permission to build the clinic on Go's church land. Steve had a good relationship with Tayamzashe, who was a composer of choral music, which Steve was drawn to. Zanampilo, which opened its doors in January 1975, became the nerve center of BCM activities. Activists would converge on the site from all over the country, and Rampella writes it became a guest house for visitors from far and wide who came to see the project and consult with Steve over a range of issues. These visits increased as Steve's stature grew both nationally and internationally. With the emergence of the BCM, several white commentators and institutions reacted to the development of what they saw as a separatist black grouping that conformed to the wishes of apartheid plans for intensified segregation. Donald Woods, the editor of the East London-based Daily Dispatch, was one of these. Woods, an honorary president of NUSAS, published several pieces condemning Sasso and the BCM for their rejection of whites, arguing the movement was doing exactly what apartheid prescribed. Increasingly irritated at Wood's disparaging comments and arguments for this kind of liberalism he was critical of, Steve sent Momfela Ramphele to meet with Woods and set him straight on the true nature of the BCM. The meeting is remembered differently by each of the two protagonists. Ramphele recounts that she explained what BC was all about and urged Woods to meet with Steve so the latter could explain the philosophy, strategy, and practices of the BCM. Woods remembers a confident, feisty woman whose straight talk and intelligence forced him into a reconsideration of BC. Woods met... I want to just go off on a little tangent. This is like a running... what's the word? A rehash of how black people keep trying to explain racism to white people. It's a waste of time. They understand. They just don't care. Stop wasting your time doing that. Anyway, Woods met Steve sometimes after Zanampilo opened its doors. The two hit it off and became firm friends, with Woods and his family becoming frequent visitors to Zanampilo. Woods gave Steve a regular column in the Daily Dispatch, but the articles went out under the name of one of Steve's closest friends, Mapetla Mohapi, since Steve was banned and not allowed to publish anything. Mohapi was later arrested and killed while in detention. The Philemo rallies and the PPC Sasso trial, with the first generations of BC leaders officially but not effectively prohibited from political activities, a second generation of leaders emerged, among them Munter Maeza. Appointed Sasso Secretary General for 1974, Maeza came up with the idea of holding rallies to celebrate the transitional government of Frelimo and the impending independence of Mozambique. The students decided to hold rallies at Curry's Fountain in Durban, at Turf Loop University in the north near Petersburg, today's Polokwane. The rallies were banned soon after they were announced, but Maeza and his colleagues were defiant, determined to hold the rallies nonetheless. Biko was cautious, arguing they were putting the lives of supporters at risk. He was backed by Mapatle Mohapi and Malusi Mapumlawana, but the young leaders ignored their advice, and the Curry's Fountain rally went ahead with Maeza addressing 5,000 people. At Tafloop, students clashed with the police. The state's response was swift. 200 BCM activists were raided by the security police and 13 leaders were put on trial. After charges against 4 of the leaders were dropped for various reasons, the state proceeded to put the remaining 9 on trial. Saps Cooper, Monte Mayeza, Srini Moodley, Patrick Terra Lekota, Nachope, Bekoape, Pandelani, Nefulovodwe, Nakwe, Nakomo, Caborone, Sedibe, and Zifulele, Cindy. The trial, officially named the State versus Cooper and 8 others, quickly became known as the Sasso BBC trial and became a major political event in the history of resistance politics. Steve was subpoenaed as a defense witness, and he appeared in the dock at the Pretoria Supreme Court from 3rd of May to 7th of May 1976 for an entire week. He was faced with a difficult task. He had to present black consciousness as a progressive anti-apartheid movement, but he had to take care not to provide the state with ammunition to find the defendants guilty of terrorism or incitements to insurrection, which were the charges of the states leveled against the accused. This was the first time Steve spoke in public after being banned in March 1973. According to Lindy Wilson, the prosecutor constantly led arguments in which he attempted to connect BC and those charged with the politics of the bad movements and their leaders. Biko was called at the very time that the BBC was embarking on its unifying role aimed at making contact with those banned organizations, and his genius lay in the way in which he kept many balls in the air at once, not compromising, not intimidating, and yet maintaining the attention of the judge. Not everything he said was exactly the way it was. The country was gripped by the reports of Steve's testimony, which some analysts have described as a seminar on black consciousness. Steve's friends Ben Kawapa said to Alred Stubbs, "Overnight, Steve became the toast of the Soweto Shabeens. Here at last was the authentic voice of the people, not afraid to say openly what other blacks think but are too frightened to say." The accused were all sentenced to terms ranging from 5 to 6 years of Robben Island. It is possible that they would have received harsher sentences were it not for Steve's testimony. Steve Biko's last years, 1975 to 1977. Steve was still highly active in the everyday operations of BCP, and he was frequently consulted on issues relating to the larger BC movement, with activists making trips from larger centers to confer with him. He kept abreast of development throughout the country, and his appearance at the Sasso BBC trial brought him to the attention of the international community. He became a leader that foreign diplomats sought out to get a picture of the political situation in South Africa. In August 1975, Steve's elder sister, Bokelwa, died at the age of 33. A nurse at Fort Beaufort Mental Hospital, she came to Zanampilo complaining of chest pains and was sedated. But she returned home and died of a heart attack the next morning. In 1975, Steve was arrested and detained for 137 days. He was not charged or put on trial. Meanwhile, the BBC held its fourth national conference in King Williamstown. At the beginning of 1976, Biko's banning order was tightened, and he could no longer operate as the director of BCP, a responsibility that was passed on to Ramvele. To testify at the Sasso BBC trial in May, special arrangements were made as he had been subpoenaed by the defense. Following his testimony at the Sasso BBC trial, students in Soweto who had throughout the year been protesting against the imposition of Afrikaans as a medium of instruction organized a huge protest on June 16, 1976. Police, confronted by thousands of angry pupils, opened fire, killing hundreds of pupils. The Soweto youth uprising and the police's brutal response sent shockwaves throughout the world, and the apartheid regime was condemned even by its allies in the West. One thing, this is basically what white supremacy always is just never covered. A severe crackdown on BC activists followed the uprising. Mopetla Mohapi was arrested on 15 July 1976 and killed 3 weeks later, a development that deeply disturbed Steve. Mapumlawana Mosholisi Mavovo Fenjiwe Matinso and Foko Mabanjwa. I'm very sorry to their families if I've not pronounced their names right. Were arrested on 27th of August 1976, and the height of the Soweto uprising, Steve was arrested and held in solitary confinement for 101 days. Soon after his release, Biko met American Senator Dick Clark in December 76, one of a string of diplomats who wanted to get a sense of black thinking at the time. The chair of the Senate Subcommittee on Africa, Clark was an influential contact, but some BC leaders, especially those based in Cape Town, disapproved of the meeting with an American diplomat. Steve was also close to the Australian diplomat Bruce Haig, who often consulted Steve on political matters in South Africa, using the latter's insights to inform Australian policy towards South Africa. Steve was thoroughly immersed in community activities, both formal and informal, simply helping whenever and however he could. When 5 boys were accused of burning down Falls Grant School in 1977, he organized lawyers to defend them, but they lost the case and were sentenced to terms of 5 years on Robben Island. Among the lawyers Steve roped in was Griffiths Mackenzie, but there was play as well as work. Biko enjoyed socializing with friends and people from the area. He frequented local shebeens such as Getty's Place in the solo section of Ginsburg, where he was on many occasions protected by the patrons when the security police came in search of him. Steve was close to Sonwaba Yengo, who lived in Zola Street, where they would have gumba parties. The group loved singing, and Steve in particular loved the song by Donny Hathaway, To Be Young, Gifted in Black, but they also sang struggle songs and choral classics. His favorite freedom struggle song, according to Zolela Manku, contained the lyrics, "We are leaders of Africa, rise up leaders and let us move forward." When Yengo last saw Steve, he was bruised and limping and told his friends he had been beaten by white men. It isn't clear if they were policemen or ordinary people. He said to Sonwaba, "These whites are really beating me now, Chishawe, but I am fighting back. But they are going to kill me at the rate they are going." Well, I'm going to stop there. This is the end of this section of the video. Please check out the next section. Well, hopefully I've finished this article. Peace.